What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another video. Today, I have the pleasure of chatting with Antoine, who you might be familiar with over on either Twitter or from the awesome articles that he's got being posted at SwiftLee's. Also, a pretty big open source contributor from what I've seen. Correct me if I'm wrong. Rocket Sim and some other pretty cool stuff. And we're going to be chatting today about how we go about technically picking how we change our code, how we make decisions, whether that's in our day jobs or writing code agnostically. So that's my attempt at a good intro for you. Take it away, Antoine, if you want to give a brief intro of yourself and kind of what you do in the day-to-day.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. I think you touched up on quite a few points already. Like you said, I'm Antoine van der Lee. You might know me from my blog called SwiftLee's. I also have a website called SwiftLee's Jobs, where you can find new jobs if you're looking for one. And I also have a newsletter called SwiftLee's Weekly. You know, it's all in the name. But yeah, in my day-to-day job, I'm working at WeTransfer. It's a file transfer company in Amsterdam-based, where I basically develop the main applications called Collect and a new app that's coming up. More about that later this year. But yeah, either way, it's my main challenge during the week, but it's also my source of all the articles where it goes back and forth. 1 week I write about something I learned at WeTransfer, and the other day I learned something while blogging for SwiftLee's, and I use it at WeTransfer. About 10 years of experience. I guess iOS 4 was my first touch of code with iPhones. Now we're here.
That's great. iOS 4. Wow. I was also very close to iOS 4, like 3.3. That's like right after the App Store was like kind of announced. And I don't even, you must have started with Objective-C, right? Because Swift wasn't even around back then. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, Objective-C, and you could use hard-coded frames because, it was only 320 width. Those days without auto layout. I didn't have to do retain release, so I was kind of lucky there. But early days.
Yeah, no arc. Yeah, thumbs up. I was in the same boat, and so much has changed over the last, like 10 plus years. So, hey, this is a really good start. So this is going to be a super, hopefully insightful conversation for everybody, since you and I both have seen like the code change over the past many years, but also the platform, right? Best practices or different ways about approaching things. So that's a pretty good segue. So I was reading one of your articles recently that I've got linked down below in the description as well. And it was, kind of focusing on unwrapping or throwing errors. And correct me if I'm mistaken on that. And what I found particularly interesting was the main point you were getting at in that post, to me at least, was there are multiple ways you can go about doing things when you're writing code daily. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. How do you reason about making technical choices and versus, like opinionated code of what you want to write? How do you think about that on your day-to-day job or any code that you write on your own side projects or open source?
Yeah, it's funny that you named that article. It was kind of like a different article than I would write normally. It was way more about telling a story while at the same time sharing some valuable code in a way. It was kind of like a result of a discussion we had at WeTransfer, where recently we had 2 new engineers joining the team, where before I was only with one other engineer, which makes it super easy to make decisions, right? Whenever you like to do something, you only have to convince one colleague and you're kind of ready to go. And I kind of like reinvented myself because, I always try to be open about opinions from colleagues, right? Like everybody is as good as he can be, and every opinion is valuable, even if it's a junior or a meteor or somebody that's, just getting started. I had to realize for myself again, okay, 2 new colleagues, we certainly have more in-depth discussions. And you have to stay open that your opinion isn't per se the way forward, isn't per se the way to go. And I'm writing a lot of articles about new features. So I'm kind of on the side of, let's use custom subscripts everywhere or use custom operators everywhere. I really like doing that. But it's one of those topics that comes up when you discuss these things with your team. Like, yeah, sure, custom operator sounds great, but it's not really discoverable. And how do I know how it works, or how will the new colleague starting in October know about this operator.
Yeah, no, I think you touched on something very interesting that I'd love to dig deeper into. So when you work in a team environment, or anyone, and when I work in a team environment, sometimes you really have to take a step back and listen to the opinions of other people, whether or not they're the same seniority as you, maybe more senior, maybe junior. And a lot of us, and maybe correct me if I'm mistaken, if this is the same opinion you hold, but after you start writing code for many years, you kind of get into the weeds of like custom operators and these like cool technical things you can do, but sometimes they're not discoverable. And for somebody new coming into the code base, it might be even more overhead for them to go and try to understand it versus if it was something like pretty simple and like straightforward and stupid, right? With that, you just kind of described it as well. Something that's easier to ramp up on might work better in a team environment. So I think the drawing the line of like for unwrapping optionals and throwing errors, there's not particularly a right way. That's the opinion that I guess I hold, but it's really important to find out like, what is the best balance for the current project and group of people. I'm curious to know, when you do have those discussions, how do you prioritize like what's important, right? So sometimes, especially with Swift, a big part of the language is writing like very brief code, right? So instead of doing like a for loop, do a for each. Instead of doing a for loop and changing like collections, do a compact map. So there are ways where you can shorthand a lot of code, and sometimes it makes the readability suffer, right? It's not easiest to follow, especially for someone who's new to the code base or new to iOS or Swift. So how do you reason about like what is a good trade-off balance between readability, brevity, keeping it brief, and also just discoverability?
Yeah, I think there are many case-by-case examples here, right? Like and some code examples are easier to understand, or you could reason like, okay, if you're a Swift developer, you should at least understand that for each is the same as a for loop in a way, right? Where custom operators is like kind of a next level, and even the Swift development team decided to in the article I linked to a proposal of Swift which got declined, and that was actually one of the reasons one of my colleagues brought up, like, hey, the development team of Swift declined that proposal, but now we're still trying to implement what they thought was wrong. So yeah, I kind of like had to agree with him. Yeah, it's probably not the best way forward going for the custom operator, but in general, I guess what we do, we have a weekly Ios retrospective where we list all the points of the past week. Where in the pull request, once the discussion becomes too heavy, we try to postpone it for that Ios retrospective, where everybody can bring in his or her opinion, and we try to evaluate and come down to a conclusion, where the main challenge is to come to a conclusion and not wait for weeks before you draw the line. And I guess in most cases, we're all kind of at WeTransfer at least experienced developers, so we kind of like are able to come with good arguments so that it's kind of doable to convince the other, and without strong opinions, you come down to conclusions. But yeah, it could also be like for 2 weeks ago, we had a discussion about dependency injection, which is a way broader topic. You can go many directions. So we took 2 or 3 weeks with many code examples and example projects from different colleagues, and decided upon a direction in the end. But that took a little longer.
I'm curious on the flip side, if you can share, I think, I personally, I've seen Rocket Sim, and it's amazing. So I'd love to see and hear when you reason about these types of questions, when you work on your own projects, how is it different? Since, I assume there's nobody else to kind of push back on your design decisions.
Yeah, so that's definitely true. So I'm doing different things in Rocket Sim, but not completely different, because what I often experience is that in those discussions where we decide to go for a different approach, I'm often surprised that it's a much better approach than I first thought, but by being open for others' opinions, you keep yourself open to those inspirations as well, in a way, right? Like, I remember my dad, when we had a dinner when I was younger, he was super opinionated and he knew everything, and in the beginning I would strongly go against him, but then I sometimes had to step back and tell him like, oh yeah, all right, you were right. Yeah. And that's, it's kind of like an inspiration to step back and be open for other men's discussions. And that turns out to be often a good solution, which I would use in personal projects as well, like in Rocket Sim. In the end, you want the best possible solution mostly, But yeah, I have to be honest, I'm not documenting everything in Rocket Sim. I'm not testing everything there. I'm taking shortcuts. Yeah, that's the opportunity you have when you do personal projects in a way.
Yep. Yeah, and I definitely do the exact same thing, right? All of my personal projects, yeah, there could probably be much more testing if tests even exist. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I want to transition a little bit and let's get into something else you touched on earlier. So you write these articles on Swiftly. You have your newsletter, which has been growing and doing great, and I'll drop a link to that down below as well. And I make YouTube videos here and try to interact with folks doing iOS and teach as much as I can. And we both also have these day jobs where we work on iOS apps and have these discussions. How do you think your learnings technically and also just collaborating with others work together between your kind of quote unquote side projects, your content creation, and then also your day job? Do you think those two things are kind of symbiotic, like they help one another, or do you think you sometimes have to prioritize one over the other?
Yeah, it's funny, like for many, writing an article is a lot of work, and it can easily take a week to develop one article. For me now, after years, comes down to like 2 hours on Tuesday morning writing that article, and it's out there, and it's mostly based on things that I learned over the week. Without the blog, I would still need to learn new things to stay up to date as a developer. And my way of doing that is basically to write articles and build that personal knowledge base, because what I often do is get back to my own website, find the articles I wrote about a certain topic, and like, how did I do it the other day? So it's kind of like a very natural way of combining my day-to-day job and the blog, where I kind of let all the others in the community benefit from my weekly learnings to stay up to date as an engineer. But at the same time, I know WeTransfer is a big supporter of what I do, and they try to do their best to make it possible what I do today. And the main reason for them is as well, like if you're a tech company and you're visible in the community, you have a way better chance of hiring new engineers. As well as it's just in general good, especially if you're in a digital branch. WeTransfer is not really in the development branch, but they're still, like they want to be visible on social media and stuff. Yeah, it helps if you build up social presence, so it's always a bit a gray area, but I think blogging is a great way for yourself to teach yourself new stuff. And that's where the root of me starting to blog come from.
Yeah, that's so funny that you you think of it that way. You mentioned something that I do all the time. Like you write an article and you go back to it to reference it for yourself because you forgot. The number of times that I've gone back to one of my really old videos and I thought like, wait, how did I write that code? How does that work? And I'll just watch my own video and like fast forward through it and be like, oh, that's how you do it. Because you're right. A lot of times people think like, a lot of this stuff, like you and I both might like, spend a lot of time on this. And I'm sure in the beginning it was more time that you must have spent, but as you progress and you start putting out more content and as you iterate, it becomes faster and faster. And also is a really good point that you get support from, where you work on a daily basis. I'm sure you have people that reach out to you, whether it's on Twitter or maybe personally through Swiftly, right? Swiftly has a pretty decent, like big following. And I also, like I'll get messages from people across Microsoft where I work daily. And people would just say like, hey, I found this video. And the first time I got one, I was kind of like, oh man, this is kind of embarrassing. but like it's good, right? So you're helping somebody out there and there is this level of like social awareness. But I don't know, do you get any messages like that or people reaching out to you about like learning about WeTransfer or learning about Swiftly or kind of your articles, your posts?
Yeah, I think the biggest feedback I got was like when we started hiring in June. I think literally more than 90% of the people that applied for the job position came through the Swiftly channels, and yeah, every week I get messages from people that reach out, like, either questions or just positive feedback, like they enjoyed reading an article. But I think the best feedback I got is, that the buildup of the followers, and showing that they are interested in what I do. I bet you have the same feeling. It's a huge motivation to see that growth, and that keeps you on the streak to develop those new articles or new videos all the time.
Do you ever think about like from your content and what people interact with and engage? Do you particularly think that you have like a formula of what you cover, or do you think that the community informs you of what they're most interested in?
Yeah, so I think it's a very good question, and I think it differs per person. Like if you look at my blog, it's most of the articles are kind of like the same. You would never find a Swift UI tutorial with screenshots and those kind of stuff. The thing is, I'm honestly quite lazy, and if I create a lot of screenshots, I need to keep them up to date as well, right? Like,
sure.
And so I really try to find those topics that first of all I want to learn about, so I want to write about it as well. I'm not going to write about something that I'm not interested in at all, so that wouldn't work for me, because that would take a long time writing the article, and then it's not Tuesday morning anymore.
Yeah.
No, but in general, I try to find those topics that are easy to make evergreen, so it's less likely that I need to come back to it and update it constantly all the time. And I basically have a short list. So during my day-to-day job, I often find topics that I want to write about, either write about the learnings I already got, or either learn about something new that I need for retransfer. But as well, during WWDC, all the sessions I watched was a big inspirator for adding new topics to that list. And if I look at the list right now, there are topics like async sequence, those kind of key features that are really close to what Swift is. But I wouldn't write about what's new in opening deep links through SwiftUI, for example. I think there is a great community presence already on the other blogs covering those kind of topics, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I do something very similar. Whatever is. So first point is, I try to do things that I'm interested in, that I'm kind of passionate about. That way I'm engaged and I want to write the article, because if I have to kind of drag myself to write it, the quality might suffer. In my case, video, right? The quality, video quality might suffer. And then on top of that, it's not as applicable, right? It's kind of just like reading something somewhere else and regurgitating it to the audience. And then, of course, watching WWDC videos is really interesting. You try to find topics that are evergreen. That's something I've been thinking about a lot, more so as well. Because there are a lot of things, something like SwiftUI is a great example. It changes a lot. So the only thing worse than not having any content out there is having misleading old content. So it is very important to think about.
Yeah, I bet even more for you. I can simply open an article and change a little piece of code. But if you need to change the whole video, I can imagine that's quite some management. Keep those edits out and make it easy to get back to those video edits. Yeah,
exactly. And honestly, in full transparency, I don't even edit the old ones. What I'll do is I'll just put in parentheses 2020 version, so that way someone sees it and say, hey, this isn't correct. So I'll say, hey, it says 2020. But no, to your point, it is important to keep content up to date. It's actually incredibly important, because you're doing a disservice to all the people that are viewing and reading and watching your material. Quick transition. So I wasn't actually aware you've been doing iOS since iOS 4. It's quite a while. I've also been doing it for quite a while. The overall landscape of Xcode and Swift and interface builder, which is now storyboard, and nibs and testing, I'm curious to hear any of your raw thoughts. What is your reaction and opinion to the direction Apple has taken? Do you think that some things you wish you would have seen from Apple you didn't see? Or do you think that Apple has kind of followed a roadmap that you enjoy and that you think is the right direction, whether it's for their tooling, Xcode, all the entitlements and widgets and all that stuff, or the language, right? The core Swift development team.
Yeah. So I'm definitely on the language side of things in terms of interests.
Sure.
But if I look back, I started with Swift 1.1. I think 1.0 didn't even reach my desk, and nobody's desk, I think. But it started really rough. We didn't have incremental building. It was super slow. So what you do is you wish for incremental building, and it was realized. And Swift 3 came, big refactor. You were sad you had to refactor your whole project, but it turned out to be much cleaner and much nicer. Then we got decodable with JSON. In my experience, they constantly started improving the things you kind of want them to release, and they did it on a great pace, if you ask me. And now with Async Await, my last fulfillment is kind of there in a way. We can't use it yet, but it's constantly what do you miss, what do you want, and they are kind of already working on it in a way. So overall, I'm super positive, and I'm kind of like super happy to be an iOS engineer because we have a fast growing forward language with a lot of open source input, which makes the improvements even more close to what you want because it's from real developers, so who knows better what they want than actual users of the code. Though, I think today, if I look at Xcode and I look back at my experience with Objective-C at the time, it's still a bit slow, like it's not always responding as fast as you want. It's definitely getting better, but, the fact that I'm constantly looking and waiting for, how much times did the build times improve during the WWDC keynote or State of the Union, that's kind of like, in a way, it's kind of sad. So I'm just surprised that it's not nailed yet and that's not working as fast as it could, because that could be a great productivity booster.
Yeah.
Right. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I think overall, especially with Swift UI previews, how fast we can build apps today, that's amazing, and it's only getting better. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. No, I 400% agree. I think the language is particularly interesting, and I also think they did a pretty good job of addressing the biggest pain points first and foremost: incremental builds, right? Different language features like Async Await most recently. A lot of people complaining about like nested callbacks and closures, like basically whatever the community was most annoyed by. Now, in terms of the number of open RFCs that Swift has on proposals, there's so many proposals that people have, and obviously not every single thing is going to make it in. And I'm sure the core Swift development team has to think about like, okay, what is the highest priority here, and what is going to be healthy for the language overall moving forward. That said, you also touched on like the tooling. Even today, even working with Swift and Xcode, like, yeah, build times could be much better. There are pretty cool things like Swift UI, like previews. While they do exist, I don't know what your experience has been, but there are definitely not the most stable, right? They could be flaky or buggy or slow. So yeah. I think like my general overall opinion of it is, I think the overall direction Apple is taking is well-intentioned, and like they're trying to move the needle forward. Did they do it perfectly? No. Does anybody do it perfectly? I would argue and say no. That said, I'll talk to colleagues that develop Android apps or that do like backend, and they use some tools, and they have their own build systems and other tooling that my interpretation is much more productive to work with than Xcode, because like your cache and validation is pretty bad. You have to have long build times. Working in storyboards, although it's better than Interface Builder, which used to be a separate thing back in the day, it is much better than like 8-9 years ago. But yeah, storyboards are not that great. So,
like, what do you think will the future of Swift bring?
Yeah. No, it's super good question. You touched on one thing I want to highlight again before jumping to that question. You have to pick and choose your battles, because there's people that work on like the Swift language like full time, basically, right? So yeah, I think you do have to be somewhat opinionated, and I think that's healthy discussion and conversation to drive the future of the language and which direction it goes in. Async Await was definitely really big, and a lot of people made a lot of noise about wanting it, because inevitably, when you write a lot of manager type classes that do a lot of business logic that's asynchronous, you oftentimes like either have nested closures, or you start passing around escaping closures between like 10 different functions, and like maybe even like across targets with like dependency injection if you set it up that way. So Async Await, I think, definitely simplifies that code, especially from a readability perspective. Let's see, what do I think would be a future kind of forward moving direction for Swift? You also touched on something that I would agree with, and that is the language, I think, can really mature to decrease the number of errors that programmers or people that are learning, or even anybody day to day, right? Someone who has experience that could potentially, they could make. Weak self, that's a good one, but yes, we have actors coming for that. The other thing that I think that we could eliminate is throwing and unwrapping optionals. I'm going to steal that from your article. So when you do have errors, especially like, I think networking is such a big one, right? When you have networking type classes, when not only do you have to deal with like all the HTTP error codes, you also have to, on top of that, deal with things like not having internet, things like, validating some type of bearer token before you even make the call. So the number of errors when you have those types of scenarios where you have multiple upstream checks can get pretty complicated exponentially. I wonder if there's a way with syntactically where you can reconcile all of those errors more cleanly, because right now you either need to switch, right? You need to switch and catch. You can try and catch. You need to unwrap, and it ends up being like this ugly like pyramid of like a bunch of errors, and either you do it in one place and function, or you do it in multiple objects that have that responsibility. And I don't know what the best answer to fixing that would be. Maybe I just write it like that and I have to learn a better way to do it. But I wonder if like the Swift language has a way where they could say, these are all the errors that can be thrown, encapsulate all of them. And, we got like the results type alias for like a successful and a failure response. I wonder if there's a way we can have a type alias that can wrap all of these errors that are maybe from different error declarations, and you can pass it back to the caller. It's a very nitty-gritty example, but that's the one thing that I find when I do write a lot of asynchronous code, it becomes very messy. And what we oftentimes choose to do is be lazy, and we'll just say, nah, there's no error. There is a result or it's nil, right? There's no errors.
Yeah.
So,
but it's a good question in general. Like how far should Apple go to make code solutions for us, or should they just give us the tools to write those solutions for the cases that we need it for? Why is there a llama fire on top of URL session? Why isn't a llama fire a URL session? Kind of, I think it's always debatable, and how far should Apple go? But in most of the cases, they at least give us the tools to work out all directions. But they could probably do a better job there, especially like nowadays every app uses Auth0 or something similar to do authentication, or why isn't there request adaption by default, those kind of things. They could definitely improve that layer, but at the same time networking is so complex, so they might want to stay away from it too. I don't know.
That's I think the point you're getting at is like, how much do they want to be responsible for maintaining, right? Like there comes a point where it's like, for example, CocoaPods, right? Like why doesn't Apple develop and maintain CocoaPods and like the CDN? And like it's so like everybody uses CocoaPods, right? So like why isn't Apple involved? And I'm sure a big part of that is how much do we want to maintain? Because if it breaks, then you're on the hook to fix it. It's a fair question. Alamo Fire is a very good example. I get a lot of questions about, well, how do I do this in Alamo Fire? And generally my answer is, hey, it's like, if it's simple enough, just use URL session. Oauth is a good example. Everybody is writing redundant Oauth code, and like there are libraries definitely out there to help you, but everyone has got some token management, some refresh tokens, some timeouts, etc. So it's a good question, and I think it'll forever be debatable. I don't know if there's ever going to be like a concrete answer, but this is why you and I make content, right? So we can share all of our opinionated content, and people can argue in the comments, and we can nudge in directions.
Yeah, exactly. There's still room for us to add our own value. So that's great.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, hey, I think we're just about time, and I bothered you enough for our discussion today. Do you have any parting words, particularly anything to look forward to on Swiftly? I also know you've got a recently newly started newsletter, which has been growing pretty quickly. So yeah, anything to share with all the viewers here on iOS Academy?
Yeah, no, for sure. First of all, I'll continue developing new articles for sure for the upcoming year at least, and mostly longer, hopefully. To give a little insight in how I work, I really work in batches, right? So I'm now fully focused on RocketSim development. So I just released RocketSim 5.0. You for sure want to check it out if you're doing a lot of development on the Xcode simulator. Up next is reinventing Swiftly.com. I got quite some feedback from users that reached out to me. Sorry for not replying all those questions because it's just too much to do for me, but I really want to make a solution to make it possible for the community to jump in and answer those specific questions related to articles or related to topics I wrote about. So that's something coming up, I think in September, where in Q4 I will focus on making Swiftly jobs even more advanced, allowing you, when you are seeking for a job, to be more capable of finding the job you really need. In short, I think in summary, there's a lot of great things coming up. For sure, follow Swiftly Weekly. It's growing fast, and there's a new thing. I'm going to give away something every month And this week, actually, it's SwiftLee's conference tickets. So yeah, pretty cool things coming up.
Awesome. No, that's super exciting. And for everything you just mentioned, Rocket Sim, your newsletter, your Twitter, I've got all of the links down below in the description. So anyone watching that's interested, which should be all of you, go take a look at it, check it out. Great stuff coming up. And I myself should check out Rocket Sim and start using it more because I am super tired of the simulator always freezing and disconnecting from the debugger. So, hey, thanks again for the conversation. This was great, Antoine. Great chatting. Super insightful conversation. And for everyone watching, drop a like down below if you haven't done so already. Subscribe to the channel. Go follow Antoine on Twitter, and we'll catch you guys in the next video. Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot for inviting me over.